This week on BSD Now, we explore the costs of open sourcing a project and discover why the PS4, which is the PlayStation, why the downloads are so slow. And we also delve into the history of the Unix man pages and more in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 214, The History of Mankind, recorded on October 4th, 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we have a great show prepared for you this week, so we should get right into our headlines this week, starting with the cost of open sourcing your project.
Yeah, so this one comes from a blog where we got a bunch of the recent news about Solaris at Oracle and so on. And this kind of has a bit to do with that in that it's mostly a case study of how Sun dealt with taking their commercial products and making them open source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is from 2016?
Yes, but
still valid today.
Yeah, indeed. So it starts with the headline. Accusing a company of dumping their project as open source is probably misplaced. It's an expensive business that no one should do frivolously. So it says, if you see an active move to change software licensing or governance, it's likely someone is paying for it and thus could justify the expense to an executive. Right? So they're not just open sourcing it because they want to or they feel good. It's because there's some gain in it for them or some purpose because it's going to cost them money to do. So looking at a bit of history. So there's some case study cameos that maybe will help us out here. From 2004 onward, Sun Microsystems had a policy of all of its software moving to open source. Many companies migrated almost all their products to open source licenses and had varying degrees of success engaging communities around those various projects, largely related to the outlook of the project management and Sun developers for that project. So Sun occasionally received requests to make older retired products open source. You can see how users might want that, right? It's like, oh, the product we were using is going away. Can't you just make it open source so we can keep using it or whatever? For example, Sun had acquired a company called Lighthouse Design, which created a respected suite of office productivity software for Steve Jobs' Next platform. But strategy changes meant that the software headed to the vault, while the person who had founded the company headed to the executive suite at Sun. Members of the public asked if Sun would open source some of this software, but those requests were declined because there was no business unit within Sun willing to actually fund the move to open source. When Sun was later bought by Oracle, a number of other projects that had been made open were then abandoned. Abandoning software doesn't mean leaving it for others, it means simply walking away from wherever you left it. In this case of Sun's popular identity middleware products, this meant Oracle let the staff go and tried to migrate customers to other products while remaining silent in public on the future of those projects. But the code was already open source, so the user community was able to pick up the pieces and carry on, sometimes with help from ForgeRock. It says, it costs a lot of money to open source a mature piece of commercial software. It makes a big difference if the software is designed to be open source from the beginning. But even if all you're doing is throwing a tarball over the wall, which we see happen frequently, that's why companies abandoning software they no longer care about so rarely make it open source. That's a question I definitely hear a lot, is when a piece of software is being abandoned or going away, it's like, why don't they just open source it? Well, maybe this article will answer that question. Those abandoned open source projects rarely move to a new home that would actually benefit others.
Yeah, definitely.
If all you have thought about is the eventual outcome, you may be surprised how expensive it is to get to there. Costs include, just say for throwing a tarball over the wall, First, you have legal clearance, right? Having the right to use the software is not the same as giving everyone in the world an unrestricted right to use and create derivatives of that software. checking every line of code to make sure you have the rights necessary to release it under an OSI-approved license is a big task requiring high-value employees on the liberation team. This includes both developers and lawyers, neither of which come cheaply. There's also repackaging. To pass the software on to others, a self-contained package containing all the necessary source code, the build scripts, and non-public source and tool dependencies has to be created, since it is quite unlikely that that existed already internally. Again, the liberation team will need to be your best developers. So just because we have the software we use internally doesn't mean it's in a shape that anyone else could even compile it to use it, right?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of tooling and stuff in it. Maybe it was part of a larger project inside your company and it was built that way. Whereas if someone's going to use it individually, they're going to need it broken out in such a way that they can use it.
Yep.
There's also the question of preserving provenance. Just because you have confidence that you have the rights to all of the code doesn't mean everyone else will. The version control system probably contains much of the information that gives confidence about who wrote which code, so the repackaging needs to also include a way to migrate the commit information. That's something we definitely miss a lot of times with the code we get open source from, say, Apple or Sun. There's not necessarily a commit history with it all, with explanations of why that change happened and so on.
Yeah, you get basic code drop at a certain point.
From Apple, you get periodic snapshots, and that's about it. There's also code cleaning. The file headers will hopefully include origin information, but the liberation team had better check all of that. They also need to check the comments for libel and profanities.
Yeah.
You never know what the developer wrote about your competitor when he was, or some piece of software it had to work with when they were writing the code. But also, you have to check the comments for trade secrets, especially trade secrets that actually belong to a third party, not to you, the person open sourcing it, and all other kinds of intellectual property issues that might be in the code. Then, if you actually want this open source project to be sustainable and continue as an open source project rather than just a one-time code drop, you need compliance with host governance. It is a fantastic idea to move your project to a host like Apache or the Software Conservancy or public software or software in the public interest and so on. But doing so requires preparatory work. As a minimum, you will need to negotiate with the new host organization, and they may need you to satisfy their process requirements. Paperwork, obviously, but also the code may need conforming copyright statements and more, and that's even more work for your liberation team to do. Then you have to deal with the migration of rights. Your code has an existing community who will need to migrate to this new host. That includes your staff. They are a community too. They need commit rights in the new repository and governance rights and social media rights and more. Your liberation team will need your community manager, obviously, but may also need help from HR. And if there's an official Twitter account for the project, maybe that needs to move to the new host, but maybe some of the original people need access to it still to post updates and so on.
Yeah, and it's desirable to have the original developers still involved in the open source team as well, for even just a handover or a few things to explain how the project or the software is written the way it is now.
Yep. Then they recommend an endowment. Keeping your project alive will take money, and it's all been coming from you up to this point. But if you simply walk away before the financial burden has been accepted by a new community and the hosts, there may be a problem. You should consider making an endowment for your new host to pay for the migration costs plus the cost of hosting the community for at least a year. Give the community time to form and organize and maybe prove that it's worth it in order to start getting donations or funding to actually keep the project going. Then there's the question of marketing. Explaining the move you are making. The reason why you're making it and the benefits for both you and the community are important. If you don't do it, there are plenty of trolls on the internet who will do it for you. Creating a news blog post and a frequently asked questions, which is the minimum effort necessary, really does take someone experienced, and you'll need to add such a person to your liberation team. And then it says motivations. There have to be some commercial reason that makes the time, effort, and expense of open sourcing your software worth incurring in the first place. Some examples of those motivations are pretty interesting. The first one, an increasing number of companies are choosing to contribute substantially openly governed open source communities around software that contribute to their business in some way. An open multi-stakeholder co-developer community is an excellent vehicle for innovation at the lowest cost to all those involved, as long as your market strategy doesn't require creating artificial scarcity. Another reason you might be open sourcing your software is actually because of a contract with a third party. While the owner of the code may no longer be interested in it, there may be one or more parties to which they owe a contractual responsibility. Rather than breaching that contract or buying it out, a move to open source may be better. Some sources suggest that the contractual obligations between Oracle to IBM was the reason that they abandoned the OpenOffice.org project and moved it to the Apache Software Foundation. Oracle was not interested in OpenOffice anymore, but they had a contract with IBM that said they would continue to make it. And so they moved it to the Apache Software Foundation rather than just, shuttering it because they had to. They didn't have a choice. Other reasons are that there's a larger dependent ecosystem. You may have no further use for the code itself, but you may well have other parts of your business that depend on it. If you are willing to collectively fund development, you might consider an inner source strategy, which will save you many of the costs of open source. But the best way to proceed may well be to open source the code so your teams and those in other companies can work together to fund its continued development. That's kind of a model that FreeBSD uses a lot. It's like, this is code that, at least these 4 vendors need, and they're going to cooperatively work on it and also benefit anybody else anybody who finds this useful will collaborate on keeping it maintained. And then last is internal politics. From the outside, corporations look like they're monolithic, but from the inside, it becomes clear that they are microcosms of the market in which they exist. As a result, they have political machinations that may be addressed by open source. One of Oracle's motivations for moving NetBeans to the Apache Foundation seems to have been political. Despite multiple internal groups needing NetBeans to exist, the code was not generating enough direct revenue to satisfy successive executive owners, who allegedly tried to abandon it on more than one occasion. By donating it to Apache, it meant that wouldn't happen again. So this is, none of this is to say that a move to open source guarantees the success of a project. A field of dreams strategy only works in the movies, after all. But while it may be tempting to look at a failed corporate liberation and describe it as abandonware, chances are that it was intended as nothing of the kind. A lot of companies decide to open source it without realizing what amount of effort it was actually going to take or what it's going to take to do it successfully.
Yeah, having such a liberation team in the first place is good to have, not just throwing the code over the wall and see what gets them or where it's end up.
Yeah, we've seen lots of open source projects come and go, and then it's like sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between a project like FreeBSD that's been going for 25 years as of next year, I think. So 24 at the moment. And it's very healthy versus, some projects. It's like, I remember that project. Everybody used it. And then now it's gone. What happened to it?
Yeah. Or sometimes people, they just put stuff on GitHub, and there's so many projects on GitHub, like appearing and also disappearing. It's hard to keep track of all the new stuff. And if it's a company that does that, it could probably just, drown in the noise.
Anyway, I thought that was interesting and kind of addressed a lot of common questions I hear. Maybe not quite so much in the BSD area as in the GNU type people, GPL type people. But, why didn't they just open source everything? It's like, well, it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. But in general, people or companies are more aware of open source and thinking about strategizing this. Okay, yeah. So after this story, we have something for the gamers out there because we answered the question why the PS4 downloads are so slow. And so this is from a blog that brought us the origins of Triple X as FixMe's, which we covered in the show before or in the earlier show.
Yep.
And so this week...
And also the mystery of the hanging S3 downloads.
Oh, yeah, right. How
that
could
was
I
another
forget
one
that?
we covered a while back.
Yeah, so if you have a game console, especially the PlayStation 4, you might have encountered this before. Game downloads on the PlayStation 4 have a reputation for being very slow, with many people reporting downloads being an order of magnitudes faster on Steam or the Xbox. This had been on my list of things to look back into, but has a little or a very low priority, he writes. After that, the PS4 operating system is based on a reasonable modern FreeBSD 5.0, so there should be not any crippling issues in the TCP stack. And the implication is that the problem is something boring, like an inadequately dimensioned CDN, maybe. But then I heard that people were successfully using local HTTP proxies as a workaround. It should be pretty rare for that to actually help with download speeds, which made this sound like a much more interesting problem. And it continues to explain, before running the experiments, it's good to have a mental model of how the things we're testing works and where the problem might be. So not just benchmark all along. You have to have a model and what you're actually trying to get at. This is also what Brendan Gregg basically was getting at in his keynote at EuroBSDCon. If nothing else, it will guide the initial experiment design. And the speed of steady-state TCP connection is basically defined by three numbers: the amount of data the client is willing to receive on a single round-trip TCP receive window, the amount of data the server is willing to send on a single round-trip, the TCP congestion window, and the round-trip latency between the client and the server, which is the RTT, or the round-trip time. And to a first approximation, the connection speed will be, so speed is equal the minimum of the, what's RWIN? Let's see.
Receive
So there's a receive window, right? So it's either the receive window or the congestion window, and that's divided by the round-trip time. This will give you your speed. And with this model, you could, or how could a proxy speed up that connection? The speed through the proxy should be the minimum of the speed between the client and the proxy and the server. It should only possibly be slower, and with a local proxy, the client proxy round-trip time will be very low. That connection is almost guaranteed to be the faster one. The improvement will have to be from the server proxy connection being somehow better than the direct client-server one. And the round-trip time will not change, so there are just two options. Either the client has a much smaller receive window than the proxy, or the client is somehow causing the server's congestion window to decrease, like the client is randomly dropping receiving packets while the proxy isn't. After setting up a test rig where the PS4's connection was bridged through a Linux box so packets could be captured and artificial latency could be added, some interesting results came up. The difference in receive windows at different times are striking. And most important, the changes in the receive windows correspond very well to specific things I did on the PS4. When the download was started, the game Styx, Shards of Darkness, was running in the background, just idling in the title screen. The download was limited by a receive window of under 7 kilobytes. This is really incredibly low. It's not much. It's basically going to cause the downloads to take 100 times longer than they should. And this was not a coincidence. Whether that game was running, the receive window would be that low. Having an app running, like Netflix or Spotify, limited the receive window to 128 kilobytes. Oh, bits, actually. Is it bytes?
That one's bytes.
Bits, yeah.
No, that one's bytes.
Bytes, yeah, right. Okay, so 120k bytes for about a 5 times reduction in potential download speed. Moving apps, games, or the download window to the foreground or background didn't have any effect on the receive window. Playing an online match in a network game, Dreadnought in this case, caused the receive window to be artificially limited to 7 kilobytes. So he ran a speed test at the time when downloads were limited to 7 kilobytes receive window, and it got a decent receive window of over 400 bytes. kilobytes. The conclusion is that the artificial receive window limit appears to only apply to the PSN downloads. And when a game was started, causing the previously running game to be stopped automatically, the receive window would increase to 650 kilobytes for a very brief period of time. Basically, it appears that the receive window gets unclamped when the old game stops and then clamped again a few seconds later when the new game actually starts up. So he continues to write, I did a few more test runs and all of them seem to be supporting the above findings. The only additional information from that testing is that the rest mode behavior was dependent on the PS4 settings. Originally, it had set up to suspend apps when in rest mode. If that setting was disabled, the apps would be closed when entering the rest mode and the downloads would proceed at full speed. So the PS4 doesn't make it very obvious exactly what programs are running. For games, the interaction model is that opening a new game closes the previously running one. This is not how other apps work. They remain in the background indefinitely until you explicitly close them. So FreeBSD and its network stack are not to blame. Sony used a poor method to try to keep downloads from interfering with your gameplay, and the impact of changing your receive window is highly dependent upon round-trip time so that it doesn't work as evenly as actual traffic shaping or queuing would. So this is an interesting deep dive. It is well worth reading the full article that we have in the show notes. And check out the graphs as well. So there's the full analysis.
Yeah, so it's interesting that they decided to use adjusting the receive window as the way to deal with ensuring that, a download of a new game or an update in the background doesn't impact your gameplay while you're playing multiplayer games. But if you happen to be really close to the CDN node, it'll have a much different impact on you than if you, say, are really far from the nearest CDN node. And so it's very uneven and kind of haphazard. Whereas if they had just done queuing or shaping of some kind, although I admit that's much more complicated to manage, and it involves setting up a firewall and more complicated everything than just adjusting the one sysctl to adjust the TCP congestion window. But
yeah, and also the other networks like Steam or Xbox, as he wrote, have fixed this or don't have this problem.
Well, with Steam, it's just depending on your operating system, and it just outright pauses downloads when you're playing a game. Which
I was just
like a possibly better approach. Although part of it seems to be that with the way the PlayStation runs, even if you're not playing a game, if the game is running, it still wants to clamp the downloads, which isn't necessarily what you want.
Yeah, so this is an interesting article. Yeah, maybe it helps the PlayStation.
It's definitely well worth the full read if you take a look at it.
Another thing you should look at is our sponsor for this week, DigitalOcean, which is your very first go-to source, is my recommendation if you're running anything in the evil internet or the cloud, as they say. So with DigitalOcean, you can create little droplets. These are your virtual machines, and you can spin up as many as you want. You can size them as big as you want or as small as you need them, and you can add storage to it or network firewalls, all kind of cool things. They just sent me my first invoice, actually, so I used up the DigitalOcean credit that we have for you. And yeah, it's nice to have this running for almost a month now, or over a month. It's very cool. I like it.
So for starting at as little as $5, you get a FreeBSD machine in the cloud that you can play with and do whatever you want. And it has a static IP address and 20 gigabytes of SSD-backed storage and up to a terabyte of transfer. So you're not going to run out of bandwidth. Plus, if you just pay a little bit more, you can have twice as much RAM and more storage and twice as much bandwidth. But, it's a great way to be able to play with FreeBSD, especially if you're just going to play a little bit at a time. You can also rent the instances by the hour. So even the $20 a month one is only 3 cents an hour. So if you sign up over there and enter our coupon code, FreeBSD Now, it'll add an extra $10 of credit to your account. With that, at 3 cents an hour, that's quite a few hours of playing around with FreeBSD and then just deleting it when you're done.
Yep.
It's similar to running a VM on your own computer, except for it has a much faster internet connection than you do.
Yeah, very much, yeah.
Yeah. And you can use it to serve things, or, with a price as low as $5, is a great way to run little services that you would like to leave running, or even just a machine you can SSH into and to tunnel through to get out from behind the oppressive firewall on the hotel Wi-Fi when you're traveling or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In Benedict's case, it was because somebody was twisting his arm to set up an IRC proxy so that he would actually stay on IRC for more than 7 minutes at a time.
Before my computer went to sleep each time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, now I'm angry about other people
IRC log
dropping.
with Benedict signing in and out and in and out and in and out, and never being able to receive a message I send him.
Yeah. A small thing like that. I also added a few things I read so I did proofreading of Michael Lucas' upcoming book, which has a lot of FreeBSD content in it, and I'm running now the Blacklist daemon and, of course, a PF firewall in conjunction with that. So it's nice to test this out on the evil internet and knowing that your droplet is still secure and safe.
Yep. So head over to digitalocean.com, sign up. You can launch a droplet within 55 seconds, and if you use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, you'll get an extra $10 of credit added to your account. So next up in the news.
Yeah, because you always want to connect securely to your DigitalOcean instance or whatever Unix host you have via OpenSSH. And there's a new version just released, 7.6.
Yes, so OpenSSH 7.6 has been released and available on all the mirrors. OpenSSH is the 100% complete SSH Protocol 2.0 implementation that includes an SFTP client, server, and so on. This is once again, would like to thank the OpenSSH community for their continued support of the project, especially those contributing code and patches, reporting bugs, testing snapshots, or donating to the project. But the release note starts with the potentially incompatible changes. This release includes a number of changes that may affect your existing configurations. Number one is that from the SSH client, they have deleted all SSH Protocol version 1 support, associated configuration options, and documentation. So you shouldn't have been using SSH version 1 for at least the last 10 years. But if you were, it won't work anymore, and it's all gone. In particular, your configuration options for it will be seen as invalid now, so you might have to do a little bit of housekeeping there. I think they've been compiled out, but not deleted from the source tree for the last year or so. So they gave people plenty of warning that this was coming.
Yeah, and we covered this in the show before as well.
Yep. For the client and the server, they've removed support for the HMAC RIPE MD160 as a Mac. They've also removed support for ARC4, Blowfish, and CAST ciphers because the 64-byte block size ones were found to be insecure. It will now refuse all RSA keys that are less than 1024-bit. You probably want at least double that for most of your keys anyway, but they won't support anything smaller, and they've improved the reporting for keys that do not meet this requirement so that you'll know why it doesn't work. They've also changed the SSH client to not offer any of the CBC or cipher block chaining ciphers by default. So while they're still supported, you would have to manually specify that you want to use them. It will not use them by default. They also fixed a minor security issue with SFTP server. If it was launched in read-only mode, the SFTP server was incorrectly permitting the creation of zero-length files. So you couldn't actually write to the files, but you could create an empty file. But that's fixed now. They've added a number of other things, including the remote command option to specify a command in the SSH config file, and instead of giving it on the command line, this allows the configuration file to specify the command that will be executed once you connect to the host. If you look at some of the tutorials we did for SSH way back at the beginning of BSD Now, there's some interesting ones about using this type of feature to be able to hop through another machine to get to a third machine. For example, when I'm on the road, I can't actually get to my desktop from the internet, but I can get to my router, which can then get to my desktop. and I can create an alias using the SSH config file so that I just say, SSH home, and it will do the multiple steps to get me to my house.
Yeah, very helpful.
For SSHD, they added the expose auth info option, which enables writing details of the authentication method used, including public keys where applicable, to a file that is exposed via the SSH user auth environment variable on subsequent sessions, so that your shell and so on can tell how you logged in. The SSH client added support for reverse dynamic forwarding. In this mode, SSH will act as a SOCKS 4/5 proxy and forward connections to destinations requested by the remote SOCKS client. This mode is requested using extended syntax for the capital R and remote forward options. And because it is implemented solely at the client, it does not require the server to be updated in order to support it. Mm-hmm. And then a bunch of other minor fixes. One interesting one is expanded the strict host key checking option with 2 new settings. The first, accept-new, will automatically accept hitherto unseen keys, but will refuse connections for changed or invalid host keys. This is a safer subset of the current strict host key checking equals no. The second setting, off, is a synonym for the current behavior of strict host key checking equals no. Accept new host keys and continue connecting to hosts with incorrect host keys. Future release will change the behavior or change the meaning of strict host key checking equals no to the behavior of accept-new. So currently, you could set strict host key checking to no, and it wouldn't be like, oh, this is a new host key, but it also would accept a suddenly invalid host key. So they created a new setting, accept-new, which will accept it if it's a new key because you've never connected this host before, but will reject it if it's a known host that is suddenly changed. Then they added off, which is the old behavior of no. So that if you want the behavior of accepting that the host key changed, for example, if it's a VM that you refresh constantly and always has a new key or something. I'm not sure that you really would want that, but some people did.
Well, I have my cluster where I reinstall machines after the semester, and I get this warning all the time.
Yeah, so you can turn that, for those specific hosts, you could turn that off. But they're going to change what no means to be accept new and not accept invalid. So if you still want to accept invalid, you'll have to change from no to off.
Right, this is the new behavior.
Yeah, so in the next version, I'm guessing, this will be listed as one of the incompatible changes. For now, it's not changing anything, but giving you both options so you can pick which one you want now and not be surprised by the upgrade later on.
Yep, so people can play around with this and, prepare for the change in this host key check option. And there's last one item. They added a syslog facility option to SSH, matching the equivalent option in SSHD. So this is good. They also have a long list of bug fixes. We don't cover all here in the show, but well worth checking out if you have experienced some kind of bug before that might be fixed in this release. And there's also a big portability section for changes to certain operating systems or different environments. So it's time for our news roundup this week. It starts with FreeBSD comes to FIFO 0.93 with VM-ADM. So, of course, you ask, what is Project FIFO? I didn't hear about this before. So we have a little bit of an introduction here. So Project FIFO is an open source SmartOS cloud management and orchestration software. And Project FIFO can be installed on SmartOS zones, running on standard compute nodes, and there is no need for any dedicated hardware or server roles. It just runs in their SmartOS cloud.
Yeah, so SmartOS is a derivative of Illumos, which is, the old Open Solaris, designed specifically for running a virtualization environment.
Yep. And so now they have the basically FreeBSD in their cloud. And they start their announcement with 5.0.93 has been in the works for a while, and it comes with quite a few new features. With our last release, we started experimenting with FreeBSD support. Since then, much work has gone into improving it. We also did something rather exciting with the mystery box. However, more than that in a later post. The stable release of 0.93 will land within a few days, with only packaging and documentation tasks left to do. Part of this means that we'll have packages for all major components that work natively on BSD. There is no more need for SmartOS Box to run all the components. And when we introduced FreeBSD support last version, we marked it as an experimental feature. We needed to try it out and experiment what works and what doesn't work, but understand the way FreeBSD does things, what tools exist, and how those align with our workflow. Bottom line, we were not sure BSD support was a thing in the future. But they are happy now to announce that with 0.9.3, they are now sure BSD support is a thing, and it is here to remain. That said, it was good that we experimented in the last release. We did some significant changes to what we have now. When first looking at FreeBSD, we went ahead and used existing tooling, namely IOCage to manage jails, for example. And it turns out that the tooling around jails is not on par with what exists on Illumos and especially SmartOS. The goodness of VMADM as a CLI for managing zones is just unparalleled. So we do what every insane person would do. Yeah. Okay, here it comes. So with 0.9.3, we did what every sane or insane person would do. We implemented a version of VMADM that would work with FreeBSD and jails and keep the same CLI. Our clone works completely standalone. VMADM is a compiled binary written in Rust, which is blazing fast. The design takes up lessons learned from both ZoneADM and VMADM in Illumos/SmartOS for how things work instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. Moreover, while we love giving the FreeBSD community a tool we learned to love on SmartOS, this also makes things a lot easier for us. FIFO now can use the same logic on SmartOS and FreeBSD as the differences are abstracted away inside of VMADM. That said, there are a few notable differences. And it starts with, first of all, VMADM uses datasets the same way it does on SmartOS. However, there is no separate image ADM tool. Instead, we encapsulate the commands under VMADM images. To make this work, we also provide a dataset server with base images for FreeBSD that use the same API on SmartOS dataset servers. Second, we needed to work around some limitations in VNet to make jails capable of being fully utilized in multi-tenancy environment. Nested VNet jails on FreeBSD, while on Illumos, a virtual NIC can be bound to an IP that cannot be changed from inside the zone. The VNet does not support this. Preventing tenants from messing with IP settings is crucial from a security standpoint. And to work around that, each jail created by VMADM are two jails, a minimum outer jail with nothing but a VNet interface, no IP or anything, and an internal one that runs the user code. This other jail then creates an inner jail with an inherited NIC that gets a fixed IP, combining both the security of a VNet jail as well as the security of a fixed IP interface. The nested jail...
That setup, I think, was partly my suggestion to them on Twitter a while back. It works, but it seems like maybe on FreeBSD we could make a version that could do those two things or something. I know it's not what VNet was designed for, but it seems like there might be some way we could say, you get your own network stack, but you can only have this one IP address. So hopefully we can someday make that interface better for them. But for now, it does work.
Yeah. So, and the nested jail layout resembles the way that SmartOS handles KVM images, running KVM inside its zone. So in addition to working around the VNet limitations, this already paves the way for Beehive nested in jails that might come in future releases. We hope to leverage the same two-step with just a different executable started in the outer jail instead of the jail command itself. Yeah, this seems like a very nice solution.
Mm-hmm. I need to look into this more, start playing with it and seeing what we can do to help them.
Yeah, maybe they're interested in an interview. Maybe?
Yes, that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like they are doing some nice work, and we should encourage that we have a good collaboration in general with the Illumos folks. And so this is one other project that could benefit
I know
both.
a number of people from Joyent are going to be at the FreeBSD Vendor Summit coming up next month.
Yeah, so people should look out for this and maybe test FreeBSD with VM ADM. And report back, give us feedback, or little report, maybe a blog post, and we'll cover it in a future episode.
So next up.
Yeah. This is for the history buffs here.
Yes, and the docs people.
Oh yeah, that too, yeah. So it's the history of Unix man pages.
Yes, so it asks the basic question, where do man pages come from? Who introduced the section-based layout of, name, synopsis, and so on? And for man page source writers and readers, where were those economical 2- and 3-letter instructions developed? The many accounts available on the internet lack citations and are at times inconsistent. In this article, the author reconstructs the history of the Unix man pages based on source code, manuals, and first-hand accounts. So special thanks to Paul Pierce for his CTSS source archive, as well as Bernard Nivelet for the Multics Internet Server, and the Unix Heritage Society for their Research Unix source reconstructions, and Gunnar Ritter for the Heirloom project sources, and Alcatel-Lucent Bell Labs for the Plan 9 sources, and BitSavers for their historical archives, and then a number of other individual people for their valued contributions to it. And it also says make sure you see the copyright section if you plan to reproduce parts of this work. But you can see the basic timeline here, starting with a tool called Runoff, and then as we progress through time, we get to the various tools that we're used to. So back in 1964, Jeremy H. Sulzer wrote the Runoff utility for the MIT IBM 7094 CTSS operating system in the MAD computer language. Its legacy is considerable. Not only do contemporary man pages inherit from Runoff, many of them in fact use instructions identical to those specified in the original Runoff manual. Input generally consists of English text, 360 or fewer characters, or what?
There's an O, but looks like a 0.
Yeah,
it's 36 or fewer characters if you consider the width and height of the terminal.
Control words must begin on a new line, just like in man pages today, and they begin with a period so that they can be distinguished from other text. Of the many abbreviated Runoff control word macros, such as SP and BR, are still commonplace. According to Sulzer, the source literature, the syntax for Runoff inherits loosely from prior languages Ditto, Memo, and Modify, written by Leslie Lowry and some other people in 1963. The original purpose of Runoff was to format his doctoral thesis.
Well, it's not the worst idea in the world.
Yep. And then in 1966, Rudd Kennedy was working at Bell Labs, and he led a porting effort for the CTSS at MIT to run on the GE 635. So in 635 assembly, the Runoff utility is suspected to be part of this port. The port was originally intended as a prototype to be replaced by Nike hardware, but ended up being used for 5 more years, and no sources could be located for that port. Then in 1967, Robert Morris wrote ROF. It says little is known about the speculated port of Runoff, only that it was called ROF and probably ran on the Bell Labs GCOS 2.
So ROF is just an abbreviation of Runoff, basically, just contraction.
And then in 1967, the script language came up, Stuart Madnick ported the runoff code to an IBM CP67 and called it script. The documentation of script explicitly mentions the backspace encoding convention used to this day by man page formatters in Unix terminals. Of course, he said this was common practice on mechanical typewriters well before then. Source code for the original rewrite of runoff could not be located, though a considerable amount of documentation exists for the utility. So we know that it was there. And then in 1969, Douglas McElroy released an influential BCPL port of runoff to extend the runoff model, again to run on the GECOS GE645 computer at Bell Labs. He did not refer to the CTS or CTSS runoff source code in writing his version of runoff, nor any others speculated derivatives of the utility. The progress of this utility subsequently is recorded in the Multics source code. It also says that McElroy's port at times referred to runoff as ROF. The reason for renaming is not entirely clear. I see that it was called, or that I called it runoff in 1969. By 1961, it was just ROF. Now I'm not sure I got the name from anybody. Then in 1974, you get the Compose tool, which used to be called runoff, was a port of runoff to the PL1 for Multics on the Honeywell 6180. It was later tuned and improved by a number of other people, and they recounted the porting effort to produce photo typesetter manuals and eliminate dependencies on BCPL.
Okay.
Then we enter the classical age, where we get ROF by Brian Kernighan. After being exposed to runoff while at MIT, Kernighan wrote a port in Fortran for the IBM System 360 while working on his doctoral thesis at Princeton, and he used it to format his thesis. By his account, the system was used for 5 more years by the student agency. The punch card source has long since been lost.
Yeah.
Then in 1970, Ken Thompson wrote RF. He wrote a PDP-7 port of either the BCPL runoff or directly from the CTSS runoff version. This fork was an evolutionary dead end being replaced by the PDP-11 ROF tool, which was written at around the same time. The source code for this port has also long since been lost. That's one thing we seem to be better at not losing files nowadays.
Yeah. History is
Although,
preserved.
I imagine at some point in the 80s, it was like, well, what good is this old source code? Just get rid of it. But
I need to disk for something else.
Yeah, I suppose disks are more reliable now, and data formats are more transferable, and, we don't store things on punch cards anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sure boxes full of punch cards take up a lot more room than hard drives nowadays.
Yeah.
1971, we get Dennis Ritchie with the ROF utility. Most of the programming team for Multics continued working with Unix at Bell Labs, so it's no surprise that Multics runoff was incorporated into Unix as ROF in version 1 of AT&T Unix. There was a PDP-11 assembly language port of BCPL, and so on. And, the story goes on and on. Although I keep seeing a lot of this seems to be research done by Kristaps Dronsson from OpenBSD a number of years ago. And he apparently contributed his emails to this.
He has
actually, I imagine, looking at the domain name now, I'm guessing this is all written by Kristaps.
Yeah, he has covered or collected all the history about man pages and how they are formatted.
In 1972, we find out about NROF, when Joseph Osana took over the PDP-11 ROF and built NROF, which focused on outputting text onto the terminal instead of printing it. For version 2 of AT&T Unix, the exact motivations for this are unknown, but are vaguely agreed as evolving the utility and language to support more advanced formatting. Unfortunately, a source record of the original effort is entirely lost. However, later versions of the PDP-11 source code for version 6 and the manual pages for version 3 are available.
Yeah, many people will remember Brian Cantrell's story about Enroth and Joseph Osana.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and lots of that history is in here. And then we see, what's that one? DI Trough and Trough and a bunch of other tools coming into existence.
and there's lists and links all over, so you can dive into each individual version and look at more details and sources when they are available.
1991, we have Brian and Kernighan with the Trough utility. The Plan 9 operating system, initially released in 1991 from Bell Labs, is a research system extending the Unix model. It includes DITROF, or DIT-ROF, which was steadily improved by Kernighan to include features such as UTF encoding. The Trough for Plan 9 was not free software until the third edition in June of 2000, when Source was licensed under the Plan 9 license. It was again relicensed in 2002 under the Lucent public license. And then in 2005, Sun Microsystems published the CDDL license variant of their Solaris operating system called OpenSolaris. This included a relicensed descendant of the original TROF as imported into AT&T Unix System 5 in 1983. And Gunnar Ritter incorporated this software into his Heirloom Doc Tools project in August of 2005.
Yep.
And then we see in the Renaissance, we get GROF, the GNU version of Trough, AWF, CAWF, and then in 2008, we get Mandoc. Like AWF, Mandoc primarily reads DITROF macro files, not generally DITROF input, although it has some capability for generalized input. It is the first semantic parser for man pages exposing the annotated content of parse documents. GROF manuals were the predominant basis for this port. Disclaimer, the author of this history article wrote Mandoc.
And yeah, I mean, this is not the end of the whole man page formatting. Still, there's some to be continued at the end, I think, because, yeah, this keeps evolving, and as systems evolve, the man pages also, or the online man pages that can be displayed in the system also need to evolve.
There's also a nice section at the very bottom that just lists a number of the influential people and what their contributions were. Like I see Vic Abel wrote the COF utility while at Purdue University. I remember seeing his name just yesterday when I was looking at LSOF, which was also written by him at Purdue.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he has a FreeBSD webpage on peoplefreebsd.org. Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that was all interesting.
Yeah, sure, certainly. The history people will like this, and they will dig into many of these links here.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize just how far back the history of BSD really goes.
Yeah, and I mean, some projects take over man page formatting systems from this system, and some take from other system, and there's merging and new developments and dead ends, and it's all kinds of a big history tree, and people try out new things and figure out, the old system doesn't work so well anymore, and yeah, it's evolving. It's certainly a live system.
We'd also like to thank our other sponsor this week, IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/BSDNow and grab the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. I just yesterday confirmed my next order. I got them to build me 10 more video transcoders, but these ones are using the new Intel Xeon Scalable architecture. So the new, basically Skylake-based Xeons that have a new interconnect between the processors and stuff. And so being that this is all very new hardware and has a number of architectural differences that are new to me, I was very glad to be able to talk to somebody at IX that actually knows how this stuff works and could explain some of it to me and help me decide, it came down to, well, we can build the systems the same as last time, or we can do the newer ones that use faster RAM and have this better processor interconnect and so on. And the price difference comes out to be, this small number. But, when you multiply that small number by 10, is it still worth it? But in this case, certainly. It was. So we'll have 10 more machines coming. And, of course, part of the reason why I use IX to do this is I will not see any of these machines ever. All 10 of them are being deployed directly to different data centers in different cities. Only one of them is actually going to end up in Canada. The rest will all be in the States, and so I will never see them. And so it's that much more important that I trust the people that are building the machine and installing the OS on the machine and configuring the machine, so when it gets to the co-location, they just have to plug it in and it'll work. And I won't end up with 10 unique headaches at 10 different data centers with 10 different trying to get all 10 of these machines to work. It will all just go smoothly because that's what IX does.
Yep. They have a very nice offering also for home users with the FreeNAS Mini and the Mini XL. So it's not just a big server somewhere in a server room, but it also serves the home users and some smaller use cases.
Although speaking of that, I forgot I also ordered something else this week.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I'm spending all of the money. I have a small storage server that we use for backups. I need that small storage server to not be so small anymore. So very similar to this week's Server Envy, which is this nice little thing that IX does of showing off some of the cool stuff they're building. Here's one this is not mine, but this is one they're building for somebody. This is a storage shelf that has 60 hard drives in it. So this one is actually top loading in order to fit all 60 drives in it. What I'm getting is not top loading. It loads, it's 4 U's high and has 24 drive bays at the front. Then at the back, it has 20 more drive bays. The only reason it doesn't have 24 is there has to be room for the power supplies and the SAS cables. But we get this new chassis and it will connect externally via SAS to my existing server. So I basically add a disk, an LSI disk controller to my existing server, run a cable out to a chassis that looks very much like this, except for all the hard drives are load from the front and back instead of from the top. And voila, up to 44 more hard drives fit in my existing server.
This is a new ZFS machine, or is it just a backup?
It's an existing ZFS machine that's going to go from 24 drives to 36 drives, and then in a couple months to 48 drives, and then a couple months after that, 70 drives. So it will allow us to keep growing our storage as we keep ending up with more data to back up.
Yeah, so, and it's all IX systems delivered?
Yeah.
Or
the fun part was I told them, the serial number and so on of the existing server I wanted to do it with, and they were able to look it up in their files and make sure that it was all going to work, right? That the card was going to be compatible with everything, to the point where they actually had a picture of my server from when they were building it. I think
when they built it,
when they built it back in the day, they took some pictures for the Server Envy, I think it was, and so attached to the email, it was like, so here's a picture of your server, how it looks when we shipped it to you, and you can see we'll put the extra card in this slot, and it'll all be connected, and then I get a quote that includes everything, including the cables and the warranty, everything, so that I'll be able to just take this new thing out of the box, slide it in the rack, start putting in the hard drives I bought. Connect the cable, and I will have that much more storage.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is for the big server users a good option to explore.
Yeah, so as it turns out, if you need a new server for open source, you should definitely get in touch with IX Systems. They have all the latest and greatest hardware now with the new Intel Xeon Scalable architecture. And they understand how it works. So you can decide if you need, a bronze or go with a silver like I did, or if you need to go up higher than that with gold and platinum and so on.
Yeah, all these things are being considered when building systems like that. So for exactly the use case you're using it for, and to the specs you are handling out with them.
Yeah, it mostly comes down to, they know what the differences are and can help walk you through it. Whereas trying to do it on your own is you spend a bunch of time doing research that they've already done.
Yeah, much better and more in depth than you could ever do probably.
Yes. So whatever size of intel you need, go get in touch with IX, tell them that I sent you, and they will be extra nice to you.
Yep.
So
okay. Oh yeah, we have a BSD Cam 2017 trip report from Mathieu Arnauld. So that was from the first week of August, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So as part of the travel grants we do at the FreeBSD Foundation, we also require people that are being given a grant that they write a trip report about their whole experiences, so that people can see what they got with that travel grant. So this is over at the FreeBSD Foundation blog, and Mathieu writes, it seems that every time I try to go to England using the Eurostar, it gets delayed between 30 minutes and 2 hours. This year, it got my 45-minute layover down to 10 minutes. Luckily, King's Cross is literally across the street from St. Pancras, and St. Pancras, and I managed to get into my second train just in time. I arrived in Cambridge on Tuesday night on time for tea. A quick walk to the station got me to St. Catherine's College. This year we were in a different building for the rooms, so I listened to the convoluted explanation the porter gave me to get to my room, and I managed to get there without getting lost more than once. We had all this experience who stayed at St. Cat's. But yeah, we arrived. That evening was almost organized as we got together for dinner at the usual pub, the Maypole. So the Wednesday. The weather is lovely, and it is a good thing that there is a 25 to 30-minute walk from the college to the computer lab where the Dev Summit happens. First morning is for deciding what we're going to talk about for the rest of the week, so we all go in turn introducing ourselves and voicing about what we would like to talk about. There are a few topics or subjects of interesting to Mathieu in general, so he listens to the toolchain discussions while writing new bits for the Porter's Handbook. Oh yeah, I remember a couple of reviews going back and forth between him and me. There's not a session going on. Thursday. He spent most of the day writing documentation and talked a bit with a couple of documentation engineering members about joining the team, as I would like to give some love to the build framework that has not been touched in a long time. Yes, work in progress, if I may say so. At the end of the afternoon is a packaging session. We talked about the status of packaging base, which is not really going anywhere right now, back then at least. On the port side, 3 aspects that are making good progress include package flavors, sub-packages, and migrating some base libraries to private libraries, which is a nightmare because of OpenSSL and Kerberos and PAM. Yeah, all these 3. That evening, we had the formal dinner at St. John's College. I love those old buildings that remind me of Hogwarts. I'm sure there's a Quidditch pitch somewhere nearby. Yeah, it could very well be. The Friday was the last day. He continued to write documentation while listening to a provisioning session. It could be great to have a Beehive support in existing orchestration tools like Vagrant, OpenStack, or maybe Ganeti. We end the day and the Dev Summit with short talks, some very interesting, some going way over his head. The weekend is here. I spent most of the Saturday stroll in some of the numerous Cambridge parks, gardens, greens, fens, and I worked on a knitting pattern in the evening. On Sunday, I ate my last full gargantuan English breakfast of the year, then back to train to King's Cross, and the Eurostar, this one on time, back to Paris. He would like to thank the FreeBSD Foundation for making this trip possible for him. Yeah, sure. Would like to help with people that either never been to any of the BSD conferences or are going to a BSD conference for the first time or for that specific conference for the first time. Always apply for a travel grant, and the more people we get there, the better everyone is, I guess. Yeah, so thanks for the strip report, Mathieu, and hope to see you at a future conference like this.
Yep. Then we have a GSOC report. So this is from NetBSD's Google Summer of Code to add subpackage support to package source by Leonardo Takari. So subpackages on some package systems, it's also known as multi-packages, but the term for package source is already used by packages that can be built against several versions, like Python, PHP, and Ruby packages. Consists of generating multiple binary packages from a single package source package. For example, for the package source package I don't know what that's supposed to say. We will see how to generate 3 separate packages, -foo, -bar, and -baz. Other examples of how to do this would be, splitting up LLVM or GCC into the runtime and the compiler bits and the other stuff, or even just breaking up, say, your MySQL or Postgres into the client and server and so on. So you only build it all once and then package the client and server and library as 3 separate things instead of building the entire Postgres 3 times and then only keeping some other bits. This can be useful to separate several components of a binary package and avoid running the extracting and configure phase twice. For debug packages, so you can package all the debug files separately so that you only install those if you need them, and so on. At a high level, look at how subpackages are implemented. Most of the packages needed to be in the package format hierarchy, previously known as flavors, and then renamed and generalized to other package formats in 2011. So the code in package format/package format handles the interaction of package source with the particular package format for package populating metadata used for package create and so on.
Okay.
And you can see we have a plist and the separate bits and how you actually cause these to become separate packages.
Yeah, I see.
Yep. So there's a practical example of taking a very trivial package and learning how to subpackagify it and turn it into 3 separate packages. So splitting up the description and the plists and so on. And you can see in the one make file for the package or the port on FreeBSD terminology, will then turn it into 3 separate packages so that you can package install the bits separately. Then we have described from a high-level perspective the changes needed to package source infrastructure for the subpackage feature that we have been using. If you are more interested in this, look at the package source debug package branch, which actually contains most of the work because they built it for separating out debug stuff first and then just generalized it to be able to split out any part of the package.
Okay.
And then there's a follow-up post expected that will cover how to handle the dependencies and the build link bits for inclusion in subpackages.
Okay. Very nice.
And they would like to thank Google for organizing Google Summer of Code, the NetBSD Foundation, and in particular his GSOC mentor, Taylor Campbell, William Caldwell, and Thomas Klassner for providing precious guidance during these 3 months. A special thank you to Jörg Sonnenberg, who provided very useful suggestions as well.
Yeah, seems like a successful project. We should be getting more reports from Google Summer of Code now that they wrapped up.
Hopefully we'll have one on the Google Summer of Code project I mentored coming up soon as well.
Okay, that would be certainly interesting for people to listen to or see what came out of that.
Yeah.
So it's time for our Beastie Bits this week. The first one is the first partial boot of FreeBSD on Power 8.
Yes, this is a post by SemiHalf, which is a company that does FreeBSD consulting and works on things of this nature. This is FreeBSD booting on an IBM Power 8 S821LC. And you can see them mounting it and TFTP booting, and there's the FreeBSD kernel coming up.
So is there anything unusual in there?
Well, it's Power PC 64-bit.
XICP.
The hardware is special.
Yeah.
You can see it's got 5 network cards at least, although they don't seem to have a driver yet. Has a mass storage array. Has some fiber channel. Open firmware.
And then there's
some more fiber channel stuff. Possibly even another 4 network drivers. That seems like a lot of network drivers.
Yeah, this seems like a networking machine.
Support for 8 disks via AHCI. And then looks like a second 8 disks. Yes, that's the second controller for second 8 disks. And they get pretty far, up to USB 3 failing to start quite right, and then a panic.
Well, there's some more porting going on, but at least there's some progress.
This is the first time they got the kernel to start, so, that panic is useful.
Yeah, for debugging. Okay, very nice. Next up
looks like it was a alignment failure for memory.
Yeah, on the new platform, yeah. That's okay. We'll keep people updated if there's something new on this porting effort. Next up is the new board of directors for the NetBSD Foundation. They are installed and patched for 2017. So this is over at the NetBSD blog, of course, and it basically states that the slate of nominees was voted for and accepted by the members of the foundation. We'd like to name our team for NomCom, voting coordinator.
Nomination committee.
Okay. See, you learn something every day. The voting coordinator and voting validator for putting together the slate and managing the election process for the NetBSD Foundation. So they welcome Pierre Proncheri and Makoto Fujiwara to the 2017 Board of Directors. We look forward to working with you. And they also say that we appreciate all of the wonderful work that SP Zeidler and Eric Barrels have done on the board during their time as directors, and are grateful for excellent service to the foundation. And they thank all the members participating by nominating candidates and voting on the slate. And this is by William J. Coldwell, the president and chairperson, respectfully submitted for the NetBSD Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good luck with your new duties, and maybe we get some...
NetBSD is organized quite a bit differently than the other BSD projects. Well, I guess each of the BSD projects is organized differently than each other.
Yeah, especially the foundations are differently organized.
Well, in the case of NetBSD, the foundation is closer to being the core team, whereas on FreeBSD, they're two distinct things with some overlap on people, but not on roles.
Yeah, so every project does their own thing, and there's no good or bad about this. It's just a different approach. So might as well try different approaches here as well. It's not just code, but also organization and support. Okay, next up is the Open Source Summit 2017 from October 23rd to 26th in Prague, the Czech Republic, and Giovanni Bekis will give a talk about the SecComp versus Pledge. So this is just an announcement, I see.
Yep.
Where is it?
So Giovanni started work as a Unix and BSD administrator in the 90s, worked as Linux and FreeBSD system administrator, and then in 2005 founded his own software company, creating web solutions, hosting, and ICT, and so on. And in 2008 became an OpenBSD committer.
Huh.
And so in particular, he'll be talking about the difference between the Linux sandboxing platform seccomp and OpenBSD's pledge.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, well, if you have been to these conferences in like October when that's over, and there might be blog posts, and maybe we can get some people to report from that conference and how the talk went and things like that. Would be nice. And our last beastie bit for this week is my first patch to OpenBSD by Nan Xiao's blog. So this is basically it's a small piece, but nevertheless well worth reading. So it starts several days ago. I came across 2 posts which introduce OpenBSD, the hackathon, historical, his first OpenBSD hackathon, and Michael W. Lucas. So these are 2 blog posts.
Yeah, so I think the first one is the Peter Hessler one, right?
Yeah,
and the second is a little while ago.
Yeah. Those are linked here for reference. And from the reading, he found that OpenBSD is a really distinctive and amazing project, especially after browsing its neat code mirror in GitHub, which makes sure my assumptions. So I decided to make my hands dirty on it. Okay, last weekend, he writes, I installed OpenBSD on an old machine and checked out its fresh code from CVS repository. Because I think reading its code can let me get a better understanding about OpenBSD, even the Unix philosophy, I decided to make the D messages as the first experiment, and during the reading, the following code gave me a hit unexpectedly. So there's some there's the error function, and it always reports current underscore message buff size error, even if it is actually current underscore const buff size. So it should be a bug, at least should be an enhancement. And he followed the pre-pairing a commit or a diff actually in the OpenBSD FAQ, and making a first patch to OpenBSD as well, which we covered on BSD Now, to submit his first patch to OpenBSD. Very nice. And guess what? Just a few hours later, the dmessage source was changed based on his code. Although the final modification is not his code, it is still a great pleasure that I contributed his own efforts to help OpenBSD better. So the patch was accepted, or at least a little bit rewritten, and the fix was put in place by just figuring out that this is a different variable to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and small things like this can
the right error message.
Yeah, and small things like this can lead to a whole bunch of new things, and even a commitment maybe. So this is definitely a good introduction into the project yourself, and many more things might come out of that.
Lastly, we'd like to thank our feedback and questions sponsor, Tarsnap. So head over to tarsnap.com/bsdnow and start doing backups. Like we've been telling you repeatedly for a while, and you're still not doing your backups. Your files are going to just disappear one day, and you're going to be very upset and be like, why didn't I just listen to those people on BSD Now and do my bloody backups?
Yeah.
All it takes is $5 to get started. You pay the $5 and you do backups until you use up the $5, and then you just pay another $5. The costs are never going to be unexpected, right? You put in the money and you use it. You always pay first, so there's never a surprise. You never get a bill for more money than you were expecting, because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and for those people who are still, is Tarsnap available for my operating system? Well, I think it is, because it has the most popular Linux distribution, the BSDs, macOS, and even the Windows subsystem for Linux. And there's no excuse in this area, so why not head over to Tarsnap and check out their documentation? But if you already are familiar with Tar and how it's basically used, then Tarsnap shouldn't be a surprise how it's going to be used.
Yeah. Plus, Tarsnap helps you avoid the worst surprise, which is, all those backups you did, somebody else has them now.
Oops.
Because with Tarsnap, it's all encrypted and signed on your computer with your key, and only the encrypted blocks ever go out to the Tarsnap server. So your key that only you have is the only way to decrypt the backups. Plus they're signed, so you can also detect if they're maliciously modified. So this makes sure that no one else gets your data and you always get your real data back.
Right. And if you don't believe us, read the other testimonials that are on the site, or just try it out for yourself. It's the best way to learn and see what Tarsnap can offer you.
Yep.
Okay. Up next into our feedback and questions section. The first one, well, first of all, we're getting a little bit short on feedback and questions. So keep sending us questions you might have at feedback@bsdnow.tv.
Because of 3 back-to-back conferences, basically, we're going to be on a crazy recording schedule of doing 2 episodes a week again. So because of that, it would be super helpful if you guys could write in some extra emails, simple questions, even if it's not a question for us, but just a question for everybody else that watches BSD Now, because that's a great way to provoke even more people to send us email.
Yeah, or even a user story, how your first experiences with any of the BSDs went, and something you discovered.
We just saw the last article was about somebody who read the experiences of Peter Hessler and Michael Lucas going to their first OpenBSD hackathons, and that inspired them to get involved. Oh. Actually, there are at least 3 people that went to EuroBSDCon that promised to write in their stories about going to their first conference. You owe us that.
I think one already has, but
okay,
more are coming. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you didn't promise me that you would do it, but it was your first EuroBSDCon or your first BSDCon earlier this year or your first VBSDCon, where's my email? You owe me an email.
Share the great experience that you had. It certainly draws more people to the front. All right, without further ado, our first question this week is from Brian about OpenSense and their Facebook group. And he writes, I was actually writing in to see if you could mention the OpenSense group on Facebook. He normally uses Reddit for such things, but the OpenSense group on Reddit is locked. Funny enough, he mentioned, he mentioned this on Twitter once, and some random guy got so belligerent about it that I had to actually block him. Anyways, his group grows by a few members a week. A mention on your show would give it the critical mass that it needs to be useful. So we post the link in the show notes here for the Facebook group if you want to discuss OpenSense there. And
I think the reason for the Reddit is that it was started by somebody else, not the OpenSense people. And so then it was just closed to prevent more problems.
Okay, that could be. Yeah, he closes with, keep up the great work. With a great show. It keeps him motivated. Oh, thank you. And yeah, check out the Facebook group if you're interested in OpenSense and doing some firewalling in that area. Next up is Mark Felder about ZFS Health via SNMP. Oh, this is something for Alan. The question is, this is an IRC extract, but the question is there anything out there that exports ZFS Health info over SNMP? This isn't ideal, but I might be able to make it work. So there's a GitHub link here.
To one for Solaris. It uses KStat tool to get access to it. Now, some of those are available as sysdetails on FreeBSD, so most of it could be adapted on all of it. And it may be a bit subpar, and it's written in Python. But that's something. But, if someone wrote a nice extension to BSNMPD or a plugin for NetSNMP, that would be super helpful. If you know any other reasons or useful ways to do this, lots of people would like to know, but I'm working on a ZFS monitoring and metrics article for the next FreeBSD journal, so I would really appreciate it if you know anything to let me know.
Yep. Many people want to know what their pool is doing and how ZFS fares in their daily operations. So yeah, thank you, Mark. And the last one for this week is from Matt about a Brian Cantrell presentation. That's a bit longer. He writes, to the BSD Now team. As a viewer of the show, I wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude for all the work you put into keeping it going. Oh yeah, thank you. I hope that you never doubt the value of the show, but should you ever question whether your time would be better spent cutting code, know this. Oh, here it comes. It is especially important to those of us who do not work exclusively in tech to hear about you advocate for various technologies, to hear firsthand from key developers about their priorities and progress, and to hear you opine on potential configurations or help solve listeners' roadblocks. It has encouraged me to introduce BSD into my environment and to do more programming personally and professionally. It has convinced me of the importance of code quality in production systems. Oh yeah. It has also turned me into a stakeholder as an annual financial contributor. And finally, it led me to get more involved in my local tech community. Oh, very nice. This is some nice, very interesting feedback. It's always nice to see what impact this show has that we do every week. Yeah, so cool. So he writes, one of my favorite guests on BSD Now, no surprise there, is Brian Cantrell. Yep. I guess you're not alone in that. I recently enjoyed the reruns in the form of the Can trilogy in a long road trip. I had been saving it for such an occasion, so much better than country music, radio evangelism, and conservative talk radio through rural America. Admittedly, a low standard to beat. No offense, that's just what's on the air. Imagine my surprise then when I noticed my local tech community was putting on a conference here in Pittsburgh. With one Brian Cantrell headlining the first day of speakers. Wow, excellent. I bought a ticket and attended the event. It was well worth it. I got to see several excellent speakers that I never thought would come out to Pittsburgh. Of course, Brian did not disappoint. His presentation exceeded all expectations, and I even had a chance to chat with him briefly earlier in the day. Wow, that's absolutely something you have... well, I have never had the chance, so you're ahead of me, Ram. I let him know I enjoyed his appearances on BSD Now. Excellent, very good. So he might appear in the future. We try to get him to get another interview, but he's busy as well. So we understand this, but I'm sure he would enjoy coming back to the show. Like Brian, I too am the son of a physician, so I'm very much enjoying Brian's medical anecdotes. He struck the perfect balance between hilarity and gravity in a profound talk about consequence of what happens at the hardware level in diagnosing problems in information systems. Firmware bugs are no doubt troubling. As I understand it, videos from the talks will be made available. I highly recommend it to our viewers. I think they should be around here somewhere. We'll try to dig them out. The name of the conference was Uptime. It's uptime.events. And the talk was Zebras All the Way Down, the engineering challenges of the data path. Oh, wow. I need to Google for that. There is a link to SlideShare for the slides, so that's good. And P.S., if you've listened to Brian speak, you know the average about 200 words per minute. The presentations were being live captions on a projector house right throughout the event, and it was especially entertaining to watch someone try to live caption a Brian Cantrell speech. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Imagine that being difficult.
I was when I read that, I was like, now I'm thinking about somebody trying to live caption Robert Watson during a lecture to make a recorded version of the Teach BSD content with subtitles or like a transcript of it. It's like you definitely have to record it and then listen to it like at 70% speed to try to caption it or transcribe it.
Yeah, I mean those people are professionals and they have some like stenography, but it still is a challenge.
Well, stenography doesn't help when you're doing captioning because you have to use the whole words.
Right, you're not some abbreviation of it.
You can't short form everything like you can when you're just keeping notes. And it also reminded me a bit of when I was teaching TCP/IP at the college. I had 2 deaf students, so we had sign language interpreters. So there's 2 of them, and they would trade off every 10 or 15 minutes so their hands didn't get too tired. But they had pre-negotiated some shortcut words to deal with things that don't have signs. In particular, when teaching subnetting, you say things like 255.255.255.0 a lot.
Yep.
Signing that out as the individual numbers would introduce a huge delay. And so they came up with some like short forms. I'm like, if the student wasn't new to it, you could have come up with short forms like /24, but the students hadn't learned CIDR yet, so that a lot of these shortcuts didn't work yet.
Oh yeah, this is especially difficult in tech with all these terms. But yeah, that was some very nice feedback. Thank you, Matt. And yeah, we'll look out for the presentation from Brian Cantrell.
And yes, if you know anything about how you monitor your ZFS, do please write that in. We'd love to see that. And all of the emails. If my inbox is not full when we record next week, I'm going to be very upset.
And you don't want to have that.
Yeah,
I've never
you
seen
don't want
it.
to deal with that.
I haven't seen Alan upset yet, but I don't want to see where this is going.
Exactly.
Yeah, so send us anything you might find other people might enjoy. And it's feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in a future episode.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is the episode for this week. And yeah, thank you for listening, and see you the week after.